Luca, the huntsman, was hurrying home. The moon was gaining ascendancy, and the darkness falling across the forests of Romania, where he lived. When, halfway through the forest, to the left of him he heard the echo of a wolf howling, and then it was answered to the right, and then from behind him, and then from somewhere up above him, howling and howling and howling, left and right, east and north and south and west. And it was then, as his feet rooted to the ground in fear, that he remembered tonight was not only for the Christians St. Andrew's night, the 30th of November, but according to his grandmother from when he was a child, she now long cold in her grave, it was the night of the wolves, when Dabog, the ancient god of the forests, the lord of the sun, but also the lord of darkness, would walk abroad and go and meet his wolves, his children, his people. And all of those stories that he had once so freely dismissed as mere nonsense from his grandmother came flooding back to him. And he realised that he was in the middle of a great meeting of wolves, an uber pack, a super pack. And fearing that he was about to be eaten at any minute, he looked around him and he saw there a good, sturdy, solid tree growing up a hefty distance, far enough that he would be safe from any wolves prowling around at the roots of the tree. And up he climbed, there his heart beating and thundering. And when he looked down around him, he realised that beneath him, in the shadows of the great tree, so deep in the shadows of that mighty tree with its huge reaching canopy, that even though he had been practically at the doorstep of it, he hadn't noticed it. Such was his panic and his alarm at the howling of the wolves that he hadn't even probably looked around him except to see the tree and skin up it. There, at the base of the tree, in the depths of the shadows of the tree, was an old hut, a woodsman's hut, ancient, dilapidated, in desperate need of repair, but with a little trickle of smoke coming out through the chimney. And he thought about scurrying back down the tree and hammering on the door and asking the woodsman who lived therein to let him in. But even as he placed his foot upon one of the lower branches, the howling started up again, and it seemed to him closer than it had ever been before. And out of sheer terror, out of fear of being ripped limb from limb and becoming a wolf's supper, he stayed where he was up there in the branches and dare not come down to seek refuge in the hut at the foot of the tree. And after a few minutes, his knees knocking so loudly, he felt sure that wolves from miles around would hear the sound up in the canopy. He looked down, and the moon stretched its fingers. The clouds moved out from their covering of the moon, and there, in the silvery light, was revealed at the base of the tree, first one wolf, then another, then another, then another, then another, until a mighty pack bigger than any pack he had ever heard of in all of his long years as a huntsman in the forests of Romania. There seemed to be every wolf in the forest for miles and miles and miles around gathered, and not, as so often is the case when wolves intrude upon each other's territory, fighting, but waiting peacefully. And Luca's breath was coming so fast that he felt sure if they couldn't hear the knocking of his knees, they must hear the panting of his lungs. But not one of the wolves looked up into the branches of the canopy. They were all busy sniffing and snuffling at each other. Until suddenly, the panting of the wolves, the lolling of their tongues, the yipping, the yapping, the whimpering, the distant howling of the wolves as they got closer and closer and fell to silence as they arrived in the glade, all of it fell into the sort of depths of silence that normally are only experienced after a heavy snowfall, when the very snows themselves muffle all sound. And then, in the silence, came the crackling of branches as footstep after footstep after footstep entered into the glade. And there, by the light of the moon, Luca, up in the branches, looked down and saw a figure. A man. At least it was a man at first glance, but a very tall man, a great, big, well-built man. And maybe it was the light of the moon. Maybe it was the shadows cast by the clouds as they moved across the face of the great silver orb. Maybe it was fear. But when he looked, Luca was not wholly sure if the man in the glade below had a great wolf pelt, a cape, draped around his shoulders, the head of a wolf worn like a hat, like a cowl, or if this figure on two legs with two great, powerful, muscular arms, one holding a staff, the other holding a blade, whether in fact it wasn't a skinned wolf's head resting atop a human head, but an actual wolf's head, a figure not so much human as half human and half wolf. Was it one? Was it the other? Was it shifting and turning between both as the clouds scudded across the moon and light and shadow played upon the figure? Who can say? But whatever that figure was, be it man or wolf man, it stood there amongst the foregathered lupines, as happily and contentedly as a dog owner amongst their favourite dogs. And the wolves came up and they sniffed the figure, and he petted them and stroked them, and they licked his hand, and they jumped up, paws as close to his great mighty shoulders as they could reach, and licked at his beard and licked at his face. They were like puppies about to be fed. And eventually the man lifted a hand, and silence fell. And the wolves stopped trying to lick him, and stopped trying to nuzzle him and jump up against him, and they sat and they waited. And as Luca listened, the man spoke in a voice that was halfway between human and wolf, deep and throaty and growly. And to the first wolf that approached, the man said, "You, this year, will eat deer, and you will find the deer at the roots of the mountain yonder." And to the next wolf that approached, he said, You will eat lamb, and you will find the lamb 3 miles to the east, in the meadows of the farmer. And to the next, and the next, and the next, the man announced to each wolf what it would eat. And where it would find the food that it would eat. But to some of the wolves, the great figure did not announce wolf or announce lamb or goat or deer or rabbit or any other such meaty delicacies, but reached into a great pouch slung over his shoulder and pulled out what to Luca up there in the branches looked like a pretzel. Maybe it was, or maybe it was something else that simply looked that way in the distance and in the shadows. But to some wolves, the man handed this delicacy, and the wolf would take it in its jaws and disappear off into the shadows. And there were so many wolves that they could not all of them get close enough to receive one of these delicacies. And so to some he would toss them into the distance, and the wolves would leap up and snatch them from the air with their jaws. But there was one wolf, a very old wolf, a lame wolf, that approached, and when the great figure tossed the pretzel, it disappeared into the shadows, and the wolf was unable to catch it and unable to find it. Perhaps it was caught in the bush. Perhaps it had gone in through the window of the hut at the base of the tree. Perhaps some squirrel had snatched it and disappeared up a tree with it, who can say? But the pretzel, if pretzel indeed it was, did not land with the wolf. And the old lame wolf threw back its head and howled a long, lonesome cry, and stopped mid-howl, looking up. And Luca, looking down, felt absolutely sure that that old wolf, who had but the one eye, the other long since gone, could see him, felt his eyes, Luca's eyes, lock with the solitary eye of the old wolf, and felt that that howl died on the wolf's lips because he had seen Luca. And then suddenly all of the wolves looked up. And that great figure, that man-wolf, looked up. "My child," said the figure, "this year you will eat not lamb, not deer, not rabbit, not pretzel. You will eat huntsman." And once again he looked up, and Luca's knees knocked louder than ever, and his breath panted more deeply than ever, drawing in ragged gasps of cold air as terror raced through his system. And even in that instant the great figure turned and disappeared into the night, and one by one the wolves went east and north and south and west, until not one wolf, not even the very last wolf to leave that old, lame, one-eyed wolf, till not even he could be seen in the glade, for he too had disappeared off into the shadows, and Luca stayed up there till the dawn light spread its fingers across him, and he could see far and wide from his mighty perch that if there were any wolves they were very well hidden, for they had all gone. And it was still gone 10 in the morning by the time he plucked up the courage to descend the branches of the tree and race as fast as his legs would carry him to the nearest town. And there he downed pint after pint after pint of Dutch courage to steady his nerves, to steady his fears, and he told anyone who would listen, and very soon people got tired of listening, to his account of the figure in the woods. And there were some who said it was St. Andrew, for it had been St. Andrew's night, and there were some who said it was Dabog, the lord of the forest, and there were others who said it was the product of too much beer the previous night. But Luca did not go out again hunting for a whole month, and it was only when poverty was knocking at his door that he was forced to go hunting, and he insisted on only going hunting with a group of other hunters, that he should be amongst his brethren rather than hunting all by himself. And so off this pack of men went into the woods, and they caught deer, and they caught rabbits, and they caught all manner of tasty things to bring home to their wives and their children. And it was a long hunting expedition, and soon night came and the men made camp. And soon, as the fires grew lower and the The vodka bottles were emptied, and their eyes grew heavy. They all fell to sleeping, and they slept as hunters do in a circle. And Luca insisted that he would not sleep in the circle in the edge. He wanted to sleep in the middle of the other men, so that no wolf could climb over the other men and snatch him, not without waking the men up. Whereas if he had been sleeping on the edge of the circle, he might have been dragged off by his feet or by his throat without any of the other men hearing. The other hunters thought he was mad. They thought he was delusional, eaten alive with fears. They heard his endless stories down the pub, told night after night after night to the fewer and fewer people who would listen to him. And they'd only accepted him onto their hunting pack in forbearance because his wife had pled that he had to go hunting again to bring food back to the table. There was so little food left in the house after him refusing to go for such a long period. And they were all ready to rag him when they awoke in the morning and tell him how silly he was, how ridiculous he was for his fears and his worries that had come to nothing. But when, one by one, the men woke up and yawned and stretched and scratched their nether regions and got ready to rag Luca for his silliness, they turned to look in the centre of their circle, and there was Luca's shoes, and there was Luca's cape, and there was Luca's knife, and there was Luca's gun, but there was no Luca. And hunt high and hunt low and hunt east and hunt north and hunt south and hunt west that they might, they never again found Luca. His wife never saw him again, and his children never saw him again. And if occasionally the hunters of the region caught sight of an old, one-eyed, lame wolf, they remarked to themselves how well fed that wolf looked, and what a great hunter it must be, despite its great age and its lameness and its solitary eye, that it could capture so much meat. Except it has to be said that the hunters, though they might comment upon this, had fewer and fewer of their own brethren to comment upon it too. As month rolled past and month rolled past and the year went, until the night of the wolf came again. Thank you.